Sony or Olympus for macro photography? Which one do I prefer? I've gotten this question every day now for the last few weeks, ever since I purchased the OM1 camera and got into the Olympus system. And I've always said that I need a little bit more time. I need to thoroughly test out the OM1, do a few photo walks, until I can be sure whether I prefer it over Sony or not. But before we get into my answer and my explanation of why, I just want to mention that you don't need to buy the same system as me. I did a macro photography competition here on the channel a few months ago, as you might remember. I got thousands of photos sent to me, and I picked out my very best favorites. The photos that I think are really world class. Definitely better than anything I have produced. Like some really excellent photos. And what I did then after this contest as a fun exercise was that I loaded the top winners into Lightroom and I just made some statistics out of the EXIF data. I wanted to see, is there a certain camera system or a certain lens that is more common among the winners? Because that should say something. That should say that maybe this is a good system to use for macro photography. But to my big surprise, there was not one system that was like dominant there. There was like a big mix of all different systems. People were using old DSLRs, people were using mirrorless cameras, people were using Nikon, Sony, Panasonic, Olympus, Canon, like everything you can imagine. So there was just like a big mix. So I got no clear answers. Well, I got one clear answer, and that is that it is definitely possible to use any mirrorless or DSLR system out there to take world-class macro photos. You don't need to use the same system as I'm doing. You don't need to use any specific system. You can just stay in whatever system you're using right now, and you will be able to take world-class photos if your skills are up there. With that out of the way, let's talk about my decision. And my decision is to go with Olympus for macro photography. I have now officially switched to Olympus for macro photography, and I'm gonna explain why. But before we talk more about the OM system and why I'm switching to it for macro photography, let me just say that I'm not gonna sell my Sony cameras. I'm filming this with a Sony camera, the CVE1, which I love. I have this Sony a7 IV, which I love. And I would never sell my Sony cameras because they are great for portraits. I mean, I could never ever get the kind of creamy bokeh on an Olympus camera as I get with a Sony and a 135mm f1.8 lens. It's simply impossible to get that kind of results for portraits with a Micro Four Thirds camera. And on top of that, the autofocus in the Sony cameras is crazy. You always get perfect focus on the eye. I can't really get that with any other system, at least of the ones that I've tried. So I'm definitely keeping my trusty Sony cameras and all my Sony lenses, but I will use them for other things mostly than macro photography. So what got me to love the OM system so much, so that I switched from Sony that I've been using for macro photography now for years? Well, there is one major thing, and you can probably guess it. It's the automated bracketing, the focus stacking that the camera can do automatically. The higher end OM system cameras and Olympus cameras can do very fast automated focus stacks with a flash in sync for every photo. And that feature alone is, I think, the major one why I want to switch to OM. And I cannot do this with my Sony a7 IV. Some people say that the Sony a7R5, the brand new one that is very expensive, can do that, but I haven't seen any conclusive evidence of that. And even if the Sony a7R5 can do fast automated focus stacks with a flash, I still wouldn't want it. And the reason for that is the price. It's crazy expensive. I don't know exactly, but it's like $5,000-$6,000 only for the camera, while the OM1 costs $2,000 for a flagship camera. And the lenses that you need to do automated bracketing need to be autofocus lenses. And there are no autofocus lenses for Sony that go beyond one-time magnification. But then you might say, well, you're using a one-time magnification lens on your OM camera. Why is that enough? Well, it is because the pixel density of the sensor on the OM1 is a lot higher even than the Sony a7R5. The Sony a7R5 is full frame, it has a 60 megapixel sensor, and that basically corresponds to 4 Micro Four Thirds sensor in size. So if you divide 60 by 4, you get 15 megapixels. So I still get a higher resolution on the OM1, which means that I get closer with more detail on a one-time magnification lens, even if I would crop heavily on the full-frame Sony a7R5. Are you following? So, what I would need for the Sony a7R5, if it can do automated focus stacking with a flash, what I would need to switch to that would be that it was a bit cheaper, and also that there was a lens with 2 times magnification, or at least 1.5 times magnification, that has autofocus. And such a lens would not be cheap, it would probably be very expensive. So basically the OM1, it's crazy good value for money. You get a complete system brand new with the lens and the camera for $2,500. To get something similar from Sony that could do automated stacking, you would need to spend around $6,000 or even more. And then you still don't get the kind of resolution at the same magnification as you do with this camera. And it's very small and lightweight, as you can see, extremely compact, small and lightweight. But sure, you can get small and lightweight with the Sony system. I have the Laowa 85mm lens here, and it's only 100 grams more than the OM1 with the 60mm lens. So sure, Sony, together with this special Laowa lens, can get small and lightweight, so that is not really a major factor in my decision. And then of course I do realize that most people cannot afford to have a separate system for macro photography that is specialized at macro photography. Since this is my job, I can afford to have that. I'm a professional photographer, but most people can't really do that. And then I advise you to stick with the system that works for all your kinds of photography, because most people do a mix of macro, portraits, landscape, maybe street, and then you should of course get the system that can do all of these things in a good way and that you can afford. As I said, I would not use my Olympus camera for much more than macro photography. I think it's really excellent at macro photography, but I prefer Sony for the other kinds of photography that I do. And that is why I'm keeping the Sony. Hope this clears things up a bit. And remember, I'm only one guy. This is my opinion. I'm not telling you to follow exactly what I do. I'm just telling you what I'm thinking about these things and why I chose the OM1, because a lot of people have been asking. Don't forget to subscribe if you are into macro photography. That is what my channel is all about. And see you soon again.